She was 24, and 4 winters earlier she had been cast out 3 weeks before the first snow. Not in the spring, when a person can sleep out and think, before winter, in a country where winter kills, which is a particular kind of cruelty whether anybody means it that way or not. And with $10, the last money she owned, she bought a frozen supply sled at a road camp sale in the Montana mountains. A heavy freight sled that had stood loaded and iced over in a barn for 9 years with its canvas still lashed down over the load. The runners were frozen to the floor. The ropes had gone to gray iron. The road agent who sold it to her told her the man who had owned it died in 6 Mile Pass in the winter of '84. That whatever was under that canvas had been sitting 9 years and was worth nothing. And that a girl with no coat had just spent her last money on somebody else's bad end. But what nobody knew, not the agent, not the town, not the girl herself, was that lashed under that canvas was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Marta Rask knew exactly how cold kills people, because it had very nearly killed her, and because the thing that saved her was a thing she could not explain for 4 years. She was born in 1873 in the mountain country of western Montana, the daughter of Norwegian immigrants who had come for the mines and stayed for the timber, and she grew up in a 2-room cabin at 6,000 feet, where winter was not a season but a siege, 7 months of it, snow to the eaves. The whole of life organized from June onward around the question of whether there would be enough wood and enough food to get to April. Her father cut timber. Her mother kept them alive. Marta learned to split, stack, bank a fire, thaw a pump, and red a sky before she learned much else, and she was, by 15, as competent in the cold as any grown man in that valley. Her mother died of a chest sickness when Marta was 16, and her father remarried the next year. A widow from down the valley with 3 sons of her own, and a hard practical view of arithmetic. It was not a wicked household. That is what Marta always said about it afterward, and she meant it. Nobody beat her. Nobody hated her. It was simply that there were 6 people and food for 5, and Marta was the one who was not anybody's blood but her father's. And her father was a quiet man who had already lost 1 wife and would not risk crossing a second. They let her go in early October of 1893. Her stepmother put it as a plan. A girl of 20 ought to be in town where the work was, and there'd be a place at the hotel, and it would be better for her. Marta looked at her father while it was being said, and her father looked at the stove. She walked out with a carpet bag and a wool coat with a torn shoulder and $10 her mother had left her, 3 weeks before the snow. There was no place at the hotel. There never had been. Her stepmother had not lied exactly. She had simply been describing a hope. And Marta Rask spent the first 6 weeks of that winter doing what people in that position do, which is a great deal of walking between towns for work that had already been taken. And in the 3rd week of November she made a decision that she knew at the time was a bad one, and made anyway. Because she had $4 left, and a job promised at a mill camp on the other side of the mountain, and the pass was clear that morning, and it was 22 miles. The weather came over the top at about 2 in the afternoon. She always told this part flatly, without any drama, because she said drama was for people who had not actually been in it. What happened was that the wind came up and the snow came sideways, and inside of 40 minutes she could not see the road she was standing on. She was 11 miles in, which meant 11 miles from anything in either direction. She kept walking because stopping was death, and she walked into the dark, and somewhere past dark she stopped being able to think in sentences, and she understood in a distant way that she was going to die on that road, and that it was going to happen fairly soon, and that she was too tired to be frightened about it. She said the thing nobody tells you about freezing is that it stops being unpleasant, and that this is the part people ought to be warned about. The first 2 hours were misery, the wet, the wind, the burning in her face and hands, and then the misery went away and was replaced by something almost agreeable. A heaviness. A sense that the whole business had been overstated and that she could sit down for a minute and be perfectly comfortable. She had grown up in that country. She knew exactly what that feeling was and what it meant, and she caught herself, twice having stopped walking with no memory of deciding to. The third time she stopped, she did not catch herself. She stood in the dark with the snow going past her sideways and thought, with what she later described as mild interest, that she had $4 in her coat and that nobody in the world was going to wonder where she was. Her father would hear in the spring. Her stepmother would be sorry the way people are sorry about weather. There was no one else. 20 years old, and the entire consequence of her death would be a short conversation in a kitchen sometime in April. That was the thought that got her moving again, and she was never able to explain why. It was not defiance, and it was not hope. She said it was closer to embarrassment. She walked another 40 minutes and drifted off the road on the downhill side, which she did not intend, and which saved her life. And then she walked into a woodpile. That is the whole of it, and it is the reason for everything that came after. There was a cache in the lee of a rock face 40 feet off the road, a cord of split dry wood under a plank roof, a tin box of matches wrapped in oilcloth, a coffee can with a candle stub and a twist of pitch pine for tinder, and a low 3-sided shelter of stacked logs, and nailed to the post, a tin plate with nothing on it but a number, 9. Marta Rask got a fire going with hands she could not feel, and she sat in that shelter and burned that dead man's wood for 19 hours until the wind quit, and then she walked out. She asked, afterward, at the mill camp and then at every camp in town for the next 4 years, who kept the woodpile at the rock face on the 6-mile road. Nobody knew. Everybody knew the caches. There were a dozen of them scattered through that country, and everybody in the mountains had used one or knew somebody who had, and there were 100 theories: the county, the road district, a church, a mining company, a lodge. Marta asked a road foreman once, directly, and the man shrugged and said they'd always been there and that somebody must keep them up and that the wood never seemed to run out. She could not let it go. She said later that it was the not knowing that did it, that she had been handed her life by somebody and could not thank them, and that the debt sat in her like a swallowed stone for 4 years. It changed how she moved through that country. She began, without planning to look for the caches when she traveled, and to note where they were, and to notice that whoever built them had put them exactly where a person in trouble would end up, rather than where it was easy to build. She checked one in the spring of 1895 out of pure curiosity, and found the wood restocked, and the matches dry, and the roof mended, and she stood there in the mud understanding that somebody had come up here that autumn, with a wagon and an axe, and had done it for nobody in particular, and had gone away again without leaving a mark. She wanted to know who so badly it embarrassed her. She had never in her life had anything done for her that was not either paid for or grudged. And the fact of a stranger spending real money and real labor on the bare possibility that some unknown person might one day walk off that road in the dark, it did not fit into her understanding of how people were. And she could not put it down. In the spring of 1897, she was 24, and working at a road camp above the town of Quill, cooking, and the road district held a sale of derelict property, and among the lots was a freight sled. It had been standing in the district barn for 9 years. It was a big mountain sled, a heavy timber freight sled built for hauling a ton of goods over snow behind a 4-horse team, and it stood exactly as it had been brought in, still loaded, its canvas lashed down over the load and frozen into a solid iced-over shell that had thawed and refrozen through 9 winters until it was a single gray object. The road agent, a brisk man named Ward Pruitt, described the lot honestly. The sled and contents of one Eben Marrow, freighter, who had gone over 6 Mile Pass in a December storm in 1884, hauling a load and had died in it, and whose outfit had been recovered by the district in the spring and had stood in the barn ever since, because there was no kin and no claimant. 9 years of freight, Pruitt said, that had been rained and snowed on in a barn with a bad roof. He said whatever was under there was rot, and asked $10 for the sled itself, which was worth having as timber and hardware. Marta Rask had exactly $10 saved. She would tell people for the rest of her life that she did not know why she bought it. That is not quite true, and late in her life she said the truer version, that she had spent 4 years asking a question nobody could answer, and here was a dead man who had frozen on the 6-mile road, and something in the shape of it made her put up her hand. It took her 2 days to get the canvas off, and she had to do it with hot water and a hatchet, chipping the ice out of the ropes an inch at a time in the district barn, while men came in and out and made remarks. The remarks were the ordinary kind. There is a particular pleasure that idle men take in watching somebody do unnecessary work, and Marta Rask spent 2 days being asked whether she'd found the gold yet. She did not answer any of it. She had grown up the odd one in a household of somebody else's sons, and she had learned early that the fastest way through that kind of thing is to be extremely boring about it, and she was so boring about it that by the second afternoon they lost interest and left her alone with the sled, which was all she had wanted. The canvas came off in sheets, like slate. Underneath, the load had frozen into one mass and then thawed and refrozen 9 times. And the smell that came off it when it finally opened was the smell of 9 years of ruin, and Marta stood there in the cold barn with a hatchet in her hand, and thought, quite calmly, that she had just spent every cent she owned, and that Ward Pruitt had been right. Under the canvas, the load was in 3 parts. The first part was ordinary freight, and it was ruined, exactly as Ward Pruitt had said, sacked flour gone to a solid mildewed brick, sugar the same, a case of tinned goods, bolts of cloth black with rot. 9 years. It was worth nothing, and she had expected nothing. The second part was tools. Axes, a splitting maul, 3 saws, wedges, a peavey, a coil of good chain, and this stopped her, though she did not yet know why, 16 tin plates, blank, and a punch, and a small hammer for stamping numbers into tin. And the third part, lashed down in the bow of the sled under a separate oilcloth, was a wooden chest, and inside the chest was a ledger, a flat tin cash box, and a letter. Marta Rask sat down on the runner of that sled in a cold barn and opened the ledger first, because it was on top, and she got about 4 pages in before she had to put it down and stand up and walk to the barn door and stand there for a while with her hand over her mouth. The ledger was a list of woodpiles, 12 of them, each one numbered. Each with a page, the location described in a plain hand by landmark and distance, the date it was built, the amount of wood laid in each autumn, the condition found each spring, notes on the roof, notes on the matches, notes on what had been used over the winter. Cache 9, at the rock face on the 6-mile road, 11 miles from the summit, built 1873, restocked every September, 1 cord and a half. Under the entry for the autumn of 1884, the last one in Eben Merrow's hand, someone else had continued the record in a different hand, and then a third hand after that, and the entries ran forward to the previous September. She read the letter sitting on the barn floor. To whoever ends up with my sled, it began, and I hope it is somebody who has used one of the piles, because then you will not think I am foolish. My name is Eben Merrow, and I freight over these passes. I have done it 26 years. I want to write down what the piles are, because I have never told anybody, and if I go off the road one of these winters, which is a thing that happens in this trade, then 12 woodpiles are going to stop being stocked, and nobody will know why. Here is why I started, he wrote. In February of 1871, I came on a man on the 6-mile road about 4 miles below the summit. He was sitting down. He had been sitting down for some time. He was a young fellow of maybe 22, and he was about 1.5 miles from the Cutler place, and he had walked past a stand of dead lodgepole with about 40 cords of dry wood standing in it, and he had no matches. That was the whole of it. He had no matches, and he did not have the strength left to break up deadfall by hand, and he sat down. "I have thought about that man for 13 years," he wrote. "He would have lived if there had been a match and a dry stick within reach of that road. That is the entire distance between him and living. A match and a dry stick." So the next autumn I built a woodpile. He described the system with the plainness of a working man who had thought about a thing for a long time and had gotten it right. The caches were sited by where people actually got into trouble, not by where it was convenient to build. In the lee of rock, 40 to 60 feet off the road, always on the downhill side where a person moving badly would drift toward them. At intervals of no more than 5 miles on the killing stretches, split dry wood, under a roof, off the ground. Matches in a tin inside a tin. Tinder in a can. A 3-sided log shelter, low, small enough to hold heat off a fire. And the tin plate with a number on it, he wrote. And that is the part I want to explain. There is no name on the plates, and there is not going to be one. A number only, so I can keep my books straight. I thought about this a long time. I could put my name on them. It would be pleasant. People would say Marrow keeps the wood piles, and I would like that, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But here is what I worked out, he wrote. A man who is nearly dead and walks into a woodpile with a name on it owes somebody. He will feel it. He will carry it around. And some of the men who use these piles are not the kind who like to owe anybody, and a few of them are the kind who would rather sit down in the snow than take a charity with a name attached to it, and I am not going to be the reason a proud man walks past a fire. So it is a number. Let them think it is the county. Let them think it is luck. The wood burns the same. There is one more reason, and it is the real one, he wrote, and I will put it down since nobody is reading this until I am dead. I have been in these mountains 26 years, and I have noticed that a man who is helped by a person will thank the person, and then, fairly often, resent him a little afterward. But a man who is helped by nobody in particular walks out of that shelter in the morning and goes down the mountain believing that the world has something decent built into it. I have watched it. I have hauled men down off this pass who came out of those piles, and they do not talk about the wood. They talk about how they cannot believe it was there. I would rather give a man that than have him grateful to me. It is worth more to him, and it costs me nothing but my name, which I was not using for much. He set down the arithmetic then, because he was a freighter, and he thought in loads, what 12 caches cost him in wood and time and money each year, which was a substantial fraction of what he earned, and which he had paid out of his own pocket for 13 years without telling anybody, including, he noted, with what Marta read as a little embarrassment, the woman he had been going to marry in 1876, who had left him partly because he was always poorer than he should have been and would not say why. In the tin is what I have, he wrote. It is not much. I have been spending it on wood. If you have this sled, then I am dead. What I would like, and I cannot make you do it, is for somebody to keep up the piles. It is one trip in September, 10 days, and about $60, and you must actually go and look at every one, because a roof will go and you will not know it from the road. If you cannot, then I would ask you to tell somebody. So it is not lost. I do not want a name on it, he wrote at the end. Not mine, and not yours. Whoever you are, keep the numbers. E. Marrow in the barn at Quill, September 1884, before going out. Marta Rask sat on the floor of that barn and understood that she was reading the answer to a question she had been asking strangers for 4 years, and that the man who had saved her life had been dead 9 years when he did it, and that he had gone out of his way to make sure she would never be able to thank him. And then she turned back to the ledger and read the entries after 1884 properly, and she understood the second thing, which was almost harder. Somebody had kept it up. The handwriting changed in September of 1885, and there was no explanation and no name, just the same format, the same numbers, the same laconic notes. Cache 4, roof gone, rebuilt, Cache 7, wood down to a quarter, no sign of use, moved half chord to 9. It changed again in 1889 to a third hand. And it ran forward, unbroken, to the previous autumn. 2 people, whoever they were, had found this book or been told about it, and had spent 13 years hauling wood into the mountains for strangers, and had followed Eben Marrow's rules so exactly that neither of them had written their own name in his ledger either. Marta Rask went looking for the third hand and found him in about a week. Because a road camp is a small world, an old Norwegian roadmaster named Nils Aker, past 70, working out his last seasons at the district barn, who had been given the ledger by the second man in 1889 and had gone up every September since. He was not surprised she had found it. He said he had wondered who would buy the sled. He was very old and his knees were finished, and he told her without much ceremony that he had been trying for 2 years to figure out who to give the book to, and that he had about decided it was going to have to go in the stove. Marta said she would take it. Nils Aker looked at her for a while and then asked her one question, which she said afterward was the only test she was ever given for anything in her life. He asked her why. And she said, "Because I used number 9 in November of 93. The old man nodded once and handed her the ledger. He did not congratulate her, and he did not thank her, and he did not make a speech, and she understood, much later, that this had been deliberate, that the whole thing only worked if nobody made a ceremony out of it, and that he was already teaching her. He told her 2 practical things, and then he was done. The first was that she must go in September and not October, because October will trap you and September never has. The second was that she should never, under any circumstances, tell a road district or a county or a church about the caches, because the moment an institution takes something like this over it, becomes a line in a budget, and a line in a budget is a thing that gets cut in a bad year. And a woodpile that is there in the good years and gone in the bad years is worse than no woodpile at all, because people come to count on it. Marta Rask followed both of those rules for 46 years. She kept the caches for 46 years. She went up every September, and she never missed a year, and the trip took her 10 days when she was young and 3 weeks when she was old, and she did it anyway. She rebuilt roofs. She replaced tins. She split and hauled somewhere around 18 cords of wood a year for 46 years, which by the arithmetic in the back of the ledger came to about 800 cords, and she paid for it the way Eben Marrow had, out of her own wages, quietly, at a real cost to her own life, without ever once explaining to anybody where her money went. The cost was real, and she was honest about it in the ledger, which is the only place she was ever honest about it. There is a line in the back, in her hand, from 1908 that reads, "Did not go to Butte." Cannot do both. Her sister-in-law was ill in Butte that autumn, and Marta did not go. Because September is September, and a roof at Cache 6 had blown off in a summer storm. There is another from 1917, bad year. Sold mother's brooch. 14 cords only. She was not sentimental about the arithmetic. Wood cost money, the money came from somewhere, and the somewhere was always her. And she learned the thing Marrow's book could not teach her, which was how to read the caches in the spring. He had noted usage as a number, a quarter cord gone, a half, but Marta came to read them like a page. Ash in the fire ring and the wood down and everything tidy meant a traveler who had been in trouble and had known what to do. Wood pulled out and scattered, and a fire built badly in the wrong place meant somebody who had been very frightened and not competent, and she would think about that one all summer. Twice in 46 years she came up in the spring and found a cache untouched, but the shelter dug out from the inside, and she never did work out what those meant and did not like to. Once, in 1911, she found a note. It was on a scrap of a flour sack, weighted under a rock inside the shelter at Cache 4, and it said, in pencil, "In a bad hand, whoever you are, thank you." She kept it in the ledger for the rest of her life, and it is still in there. She married, at 31, a millwright named Halver who found out about it in their second year when she came home in September with her hands wrecked, and who asked, and who was told, and who came with her every September for 29 years after that and never told anybody either. She added 5 caches. The book ended at 12, she made it 17. Because the country changed and the roads changed and people got into trouble in new places. She cited them the way Marrow said to, lee of rock, down hillside, 5 miles apart on the bad stretches, and she stamped the plates with the punch and hammer that had been in the sled, and she gave them numbers, 13 through 17, and she put no name on them. And she kept his rule about the name so strictly that it became, over 4.5 decades, a slightly absurd secret. There were people in that county in 1930 who had used those caches all their lives, whose fathers had used them, and who assumed the road district maintained them. The road district assumed the county did. The county had a line item at one point in the 1920s for something else entirely that everyone believed was the woodpiles. Marta Rask sat in a county meeting in 1926 and listened to a man thank the road district for the mountain shelters and said nothing and went home, and went up in September. She was asked once, by a young woman who had worked out part of it, which happened perhaps 3 times in her life, why she did not just tell people. And Marta gave the answer Eben Marrow had given her, which she had by then believed for 30 years, that a person who is nearly dead should not have to owe anybody, and that the whole point of a number is that it does not ask anything of you. Then she said the other part, which was hers and not his, and which the young woman wrote down, and which is the reason we know the story at all. She said, I sat in number 9 for 19 hours, and I did not know whose wood I was burning. And I have thought since that this is the finest thing anybody ever did for me, not the wood, the not knowing. He gave me my life and he arranged it so I would never have to feel small about it. I have been trying to pay that back for 40 years, and the only way to pay it back is to do the same thing and not sign it. She died in 1943, at 70, and she left the ledger to a young roadman she had spent 3 years choosing, along with the punch and the hammer, and a note that said only, keep the numbers. No names. Go in September. Ward Pruitt, the road agent who had told her she'd spent her last money on somebody else's bad end, lived another 11 years and never learned what was in the chest. Because she did not tell him, and because the sale record said, 1 sled, contents unknown. If you drive the 6-mile road today, and it is a paved highway now, over the same pass, there is a marked pullout 11 miles below the summit at a rock face, and there is a small state historical sign there, put up in 1968 after a county archivist found a ledger in a roadman's effects and spent 2 years working out what it was. The sign has the story on it, in short. It gives the dates. It says that between 1872 and at least 1961, an unbroken chain of at least 5 people maintained a system of anonymous emergency woodpiles along the mountain roads of that county, at their own expense, and that no one has ever established how many lives it saved, and that not one of them signed the book. And bolted to a post beside the sign, because the archivist found it in the original shelter and thought it belonged there, is a tin plate, blank except for a number. There is a kind of inheritance that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with a chore somebody quietly did. It waits under the frozen canvas of the world's ordinary things, not for the one who wants a fortune, but for the one who has been saved by it already and does not know whom to thank, because they are the only one who will understand why it must never be signed. The world had told Marta Rask she was worthless the same way it had told that Sled it was 9 years of rot, with a shut door and a low price and a hard shrug before winter. It only ever takes one person who has sat in the cold and been saved by a stranger to prove the world's arithmetic wrong. Marta Rask was 24 years old, and 4 winters earlier she had been cast out 3 weeks before the first snow. She had $10 to her name, and she spent it on a frozen supply sled standing in a road district barn in the Montana mountains. It was the best $10 she ever spent. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, has a stranger ever helped you in a way that left you no possible means of thanking them? We'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.